Hi, welcome everybody. I'm Leslie Korn, and I'm delighted to be back with you today. And let's give a shout out and a thanks to Rachel for her intrepid work hosting this series. Today is part one of two parts, all about sugar. We are in sugar season. This is when we're really stressed out anyway with the holidays, but on top of that, our clients are stressed out. And for some reason, this is the season where we're supposed to be eating lots of sugar or we're exposed to it. And I was thinking about how profound is the connection between trauma and the experience of traumatic stress and complex trauma and sugar addiction. And lest you think that sugar addiction is any less potent and powerful than alcohol or drug addiction, let me tell you, it has profound effects on our physical and emotional well being. So, today, what I want to do is review what the major problems are with sugar and then give you some tips and hints and an approach next week on how to reduce or even eliminate sugar and why it's so important for us to do that in trauma recovery. And what I thought would be helpful, if you're like me, we've got lots of trauma patients, lots of traumatic clients who are really struggling, not just emotionally, but physically. And as a psychotherapist, I came to working with the body because I wanted to work holistically. I wanted to respond to the whole person, not just the mental and emotional. Yes, we're dealing with attachment. Yes, we're dealing with self regulation. But then I started thinking, what about mood is affected by food? And the biggest culprit on destabilizing mood is sugar. And so I thought, wow, what if it's not just the effects of interpersonal trauma in particular that are destabilizing mood and the ability to self regulate, but what are the nutritional influences? And wouldn't that give us even more benefit if we could address those? So that's how my work evolved. And it's led to this advanced course called Integrative Health and Nutrition for the Treatment of PTSD and Complex Trauma, which is my special area. So I'm looking forward to sharing more about the course and some of the course content with you, which is a certification. Okay, Rachel, so let's get started with our slide deck. And here you see the title of the course. It's, I think we're at about 30 hours. Go at your own pace. I guarantee you this will illuminate your practice. Next slide. I thought I'd share with you. Let's see if the next slide is coming. There we go. Thanks. I wanted to share with you about a client of mine named Miriam. And she, in many ways, reflects so many of our clients, I think. She's 32, she's a social work student, and isn't it true that as wounded healers, we go into the professions to help others as we've recovered and are in recovery from our own traumatic experiences? And Miriam was such a young woman, lovely young woman to work with. She was in a stable partnership. We'd been working for 6 months. She'd been sober from alcohol for 4 years. She had a history of adverse childhood events, PTSD, and complex trauma. She experienced anxiety, depression, a lot of chronic pain, particularly pelvic and joint pain. She had headaches, fatigue. She woke up in the middle of the night for an hour to an hour and a half, couldn't get back to sleep. And I'm going to ask you to pay attention to that because next week I'm going to give you some hints about how to understand when people have what's called type 2 insomnia, where they wake up in the middle of the night. So make a note of that. We'll get back to that. She loves bike riding, so that's great that she's exercising. She loves her cats and dogs. She had good social supports and she enjoyed cooking, which is always a plus when you want to work with someone to really help them with their nutrition. And her goals were to integrate mind and body, make connections between her traumatic experiences and how they affected her body as well as her mind. She wanted to feel more energy, less fatigue, sleep better, less pain. Who doesn't, right? And this is so common. Almost, I would say 95% of my caseload could answer to many of these broad issues that women and men are dealing with. She said, I crave sugar and I can't seem to stop eating it. I feel better when I don't, but, and that was what she brought to me. Now, the first thing we did when we were addressing her self care is I asked her to fill out a food mood diary. And that's a diary that I teach about in the course where you fill out what you're eating and when, and then how you feel throughout the day. And we review that. And I teach you how to assess and review that. And when I reviewed it, I saw sugar, sugar, sugar everywhere in that diary. So, what's the next step with Miriam? And let me share with you about how I began to interpret the problem that Miriam was facing. Next. So, one of the things that happens with trauma at any age, can be early life or adolescence, doesn't matter, is the hormone cortisol becomes dysregulated. Now, cortisol is called the stress hormone for a good reason because it rises in response to stress. But one of the things that happens when it keeps rising in response to chronic stress is ultimately it gets depleted. Now, cortisol is responsible for many things in the body. It raises our blood sugar levels. That's what gives us the get up and go when we need to get out of the way of oncoming traffic, or we've all heard the stories of lifting a car up off a child and that superhuman strength that comes with major stress. That's cortisol that drives our energy. But in trauma, trauma stresses out our stress hormone called cortisol. Now, we can have both high levels of cortisol, that's usually in acute stress, but over time, as I mentioned, we get depleted. Think about having your foot on the pedal in your car. You're accelerating, and if you're in drive, you're going to go forward and you're going fast. That's your acute stress, your acute trauma. You've got a lot of fuel, a lot of cortisol in that engine. But imagine that you're in park and your foot is still on the pedal. What happen? You're going to rev that engine and ultimately it'll burn out. And that's what happens to our body. And that leads to a whole panoply of effects on mind and body. And one of those effects is it leads us to crave sugar. Now, for those of you interested in how do we know this, we measure cortisol by testing saliva. That's something else I teach in the assessments section. It's a very simple test. Anybody can do it. And what it tells us is how much cortisol you're secreting at any particular time of the day. And the fascinating work that's been done on complex trauma, trauma of Holocaust survivors, intergenerational trauma showed us that we can often have very low cortisol. We talked about this last time when we explored circadian rhythm. We can have very low cortisol if we've been under chronic stress, and that low cortisol manifests in the morning, and that's why we can feel so lethargic or sluggish. Our clients experience pain, they're depressed, they may have an anxious depression in the morning. That is all biological. It is not just emotional or cerebrally based. It is a biological effect. And that's why I'm so excited about helping people reverse that when we're doing psychotherapy and counseling together. And so, alcohol also is really at its core a sugar craving. And so, remember, Miriam has been sober for 4 years. But one of the missing pieces in alcohol recovery is that we don't often have the opportunity to educate our clients. And I'm telling you, if you can help your client recognize that alcohol is not just a self medication to depress overwhelming feelings. And we know 70% of people with alcohol addiction have trauma histories. But it's also a literal biological sugar addiction. And this is why so many people in alcohol recovery just go into sugar addiction. And so we're going step by step, releasing and eliminating and helping support our clients with those addictions. And the important thing about this is we work with so much shame and shame recovery in our work together that I love to educate my clients. It is not their fault. This is a biological craving that results in large part as a result of traumatic stress and the dysregulation of cortisol. And when I educate my clients about that, the shame can really lift and we can really move forward in therapy. Next slide. So the other problem with sugar, we know that PTSD and complex trauma hyperactivate the immune system. This leads to inflammation. And keep in mind that one of the goals of cortisol in the body, you know the word cortisone or hydrocortisone, we get cortisone shots to reduce inflammation. Cortisol is our natural painkiller, but what about when it's depleted? That's what leads to so much inflammation and lack of ability to reduce that inflammation. And sugar, we're still on that sugar craving uh, treadmill, exacerbates this inflammation. And we know now that depression and PTSD have underlying their effects biologically inflammatory process. This is like a slow, low burning fire. You may not even feel it in your body. It may not have even risen to the effects of, oh, this hurts or that hurts. But with Miriam, she was already feeling a great deal of pain. So this all becomes a complex of experience leading to behaviors and biological changes that is completely reversible and manageable. We just need to know what to do. And the other effect of inflammation in the body is that it depresses serotonin and other neurotransmitters. And so, again, we've got a lot of reinforcement for mood and depression. So, I always work first thing when I'm working with self-care is I assess how much sugar you're eating, and then I want to educate the client about why it is literally poison for their health. Next slide, please. So, what is the hidden relationship? We know that food is highly correlated, a food addiction, with the experience of ACEs and complex trauma, especially sugar and carb addiction. No one ever said to me, Dr. Korn, help me. I'm eating too much coleslaw. I'm eating too much celery. No. What do people say? I can't stop the sweets. I'm eating. Snickers at night. I'm having a pastry in the morning. Help, I'm eating too much bread and butter. And that is essentially the issue, that the brain is craving these sugars in order to lift up and balance out the loss of energy and the disruption of the stress hormones in response to trauma. We know that sugar is a self medication. It makes us feel better momentarily, but it actually depresses dopamine, our feel good and focus neurotransmitters. So it's kind of a false sense of feeling good. And have you ever had that experience? You've gone to a birthday party or a special event, you've had a cup of well, cocoa maybe, or a cake with lots of frosting, and it's delicious in the moment. And then you feel afterwards, oh my God, I'm dizzy, I feel crappy, I'm nauseated. Why did I do that? It's because it gives that momentary boost of energy, and then our blood sugar falls flat, and we want to sit down. Sometimes people can feel even a little rubbery and shaky if their blood glucose drops too quickly. So we get a little bit more energy for the moment. And that's the other reason we go for sugar. I need some quick energy, but the long term effects are really deleterious. I mentioned alcohol as a sugar, but it all leads to inflammation. And keep in mind, we don't have to have cookies and a birthday cake. There is so much sugar in packaged foods. It's often called corn syrup, all these additives that are actually put in foods to addict us to those foods and keep us coming back for more. It's a lot of research on that. Next slide. So, in general, how do we think of nutritional therapy for trauma recovery? And let's keep this in mind when we think about Miriam and what she said her goals are and what her needs are physically and mentally. We want to manage the stress response. And in the course, I teach you about what underlies the stress response. It's called the HPAT axis, and that stands for the hypothalamus in the brain, the pituitary in the brain, the adrenal glands that support and secrete our cortisol, and then our thyroid. How many of you work with people who have hypothyroid or thyroid problems? It's very common in trauma survivors. And with thyroid problems, you can have a lot of depression as well. Last time we talked about balancing circadian rhythm, the sleep wake cycle. That's going to help mood and sleep. We're going to balance blood sugar handling. That means mood follows food. And that's really the essence of our focus today. We're going to reduce inflammation. If we reduce inflammation in the body, we feel better, our joints move better, we have less pain, and our neurotransmitters do their job. We want to provide analgesia. So many of our clients are in chronic pain, whether it was from an occupational trauma, war experience, or with Miriam, she had a lot of pelvic pain. She was a survivor of sexual violence. And so I want to reduce that inflammatory process. That's why it's so important to eat our blue and red fruits, those big anti-inflammatory fruits like pomegranate and blueberries and raspberries. And then ultimately, everything we're doing is we're enhancing biological resilience. We're already doing the job of emotional resilience in our work in counseling. Let's add on and get an enhanced effect by finding ways to enhance the biology. That's often the missing piece that I'll give you some hints about today and fully in the course. Next slide, please. So this leads us to food cravings because this is where Miriam was complaining. I crave sugar. I can't stop eating it. And that's what so many of my clients say. We crave foods for a variety of reasons. Let's put it front and center that our brain is sending us signals. Give me more. Give me sugar. Cortisol is low. I need energy. So that's number one. I feel emotionally down. I want to feel better. We think we're going to feel better, and we do for a moment, and then that dissipates. We can even crave foods that we're allergic to, and they function like a drug. So many people are allergic to gluten, which acts like an opiate in the brain. It actually releases particular types of opiates. That's why when you have a lot of breads and grains with gluten, an hour and a half later, you want to fall asleep. Not only does it enhance and increase all that insulin response, but it's actually relaxing. It's soporific, but it can go too far and make you have low energy and go to sleep. And so, this is part of the addictive nature of these glutinous and sugar based pastries and breads. And we generally, as I said, crave carbs and fats. We don't tend to crave celery, but I'm going to give you some hints about how to stop that craving in a moment. And then we've got our comfort foods, and there's nothing wrong with comforting ourselves as long as we do it consciously and we are in control of the self comfort process. Comfort foods may remind us of people in our lives, maybe people we've loved and lost. The holidays are so challenging at times. They're supposed to be all fun and gathering, and maybe they are, but for so many of our clients, they just reinforce the loss or the pain of childhood or different times in their lives. And then, of course, foods alter consciousness. Whether it's alcohol or drugs, we usually think of as altering consciousness, but sugar alters consciousness. And so we tend to, when we're feeling anxious, go for the carbs. And I don't mean a big salad, I mean the pastries and the breads. We go for carbs and fats because that reduces anxiety for the moment. And then when we have want energy and more focus, we'll often go for the proteins or dopamine rich foods like coffee. Next slide. So, the kitchen is your pharmacy. That is our mantra for the day. Use your kitchen as your natural drugstore, and we use it wisely. Next slide. Let's use the principle of substitutions. We're tuning into what is my brain, mind, body telling me I need biologically. Put the emotional to the side. Let's take care of my brain and its need for chemicals and nutrients. Understand the biochemistry of these foods. Find substitutions that address these needs, but that are healthier and without the side effects. Find an alternative food that provides the same effect as the foods you crave, and importantly, slow the uptake of glucose. It's not just that we're eating sugar, but the refined sugars, the white sugars and the carbs, shoot through our bloodstream so quickly, it gives us a quick high and then immediately drops us down. And when I'm working with clients who are mood labile, they describe feeling up and down throughout the day. And we're doing a lot of DBT work. I incorporate CBT. I do post trauma counseling. I do a lot of integrative approaches. And yet, if I don't address the biological food based source of their up and down, I'm not really quite sure of how labile they actually are until I tease out the effects of that sugar and refined carbs in their lives. And I promise you, I sometimes will see 25, 30, 50, even 75% improvement in mood stability just by eliminating these mood destabilizing foods. And always, always, always mix a fat and a protein with a carbohydrate. So, as you're, let's say, coming off and truly detoxifying from your pastry, have a hard boiled egg with it. Or have a smoothie with coconut, and then slowly begin to eliminate the culprit. Because what happens is protein and fat will stabilize your mood, whereas these refined carbohydrates destabilize. So we work with substitution, slowly eliminating the culprits as we support the brain with what's truly nourishing. Next. One of the things I did with Miriam, and I'll give you the results next week, is we made a food substitutions list. And this is a handout in the course. And you can feel free to use this right now with your clients. On the left hand side, I asked her to name the comfort foods that she was eating. She loved wheat toast with butter and jam. So, wheat with sugar, wheat toast, and then the jam had a lot of sugar. She had her chocolate bar with sugar, and then she loved fast food, French fries. And so I talked with her and I said, "What would be a great alternative? What is another thing that you love?" And I gave her some prompts to get her going. She said, "I love baked potato with all the fixings." And that is a wonderful alternative, either a baked white potato or a baked sweet potato. It's got sweetness, it's got carbs, but it won't shoot through your system that quickly, and it'll satisfy that sweet tooth. And I had her add a little bit of raw butter and a little bit of salt because the adrenal glands love salt. And so, not too much of it, but just enough. And that was so satisfying to her. And she felt like she was out of the grip of that sugar addiction. The other thing we talked about is you don't have to give up cocoa or chocolate or sweetness. Let's just give you a good quality cocoa, and let's sweeten it with stevia. And she hadn't heard about stevia. Some of my clients don't like stevia. That's all right. We've got lots of other alternatives. And then how about a little whipped cream? There's a little bit of that good quality fat for her. She loved that. She made it every afternoon instead of going for the pastries. And then we talked about fast food French fries, which, as you know, that oil is so bad on the liver, and it's the liver that's in recovery with alcohol or sugar addiction. That's our sugar craving organ. So let's feed it with good quality fats. And she was very happy to bake some fries and use all that healing olive oil for her liver. Next slide. So, what are some initial sweet self care actions you can do? Eat sweets, don't have to give them up, but eat them smart. Use the sugar alternatives, never use the synthetic substitutes, never use artificial sugars. They're very mood destabilizing. Oh, and I'm going to welcome the sun through my window right now and take it into my eyes to regulate my circadian rhythm. Gradually wean and use more whole sugars. One of the things I do is, unless you can go cold turkey, and some people will, many people can't, and that's okay. Slowly start to substitute your white sugar for your honey or your molasses. How about a delicious Boston baked bean? You can tell I'm a Bostonian, and I love those Boston baked beans with molasses, so rich in iron, so important for our health. So, what we're slowly doing is detoxing from the intensity of those tastes of white sugar to a healthier type of whole sugar, maybe some molasses or honey, maple syrup, and then slowly add in more stevia or yacon syrup or brown rice syrup. And so you start to work with someone just like we help someone detoxify from self harming behaviors or vulnerability issues. Um, we're going to work with self care in detoxifying from some of these foods that really have only negative effects and nothing positive about them. And you're also going to incorporate, and you'll do this once you really get a handle and learn about why and the applications of this. There are actually nutrients and herbs that we use to reduce cravings that are all natural and help blood sugar metabolism. Chromium, berberine, vitamin C, and fiber. Fiber is so important for slowing down the uptake of sugar and stabilizing mood lability. That's why eating a whole apple is so much better than drinking a glass of apple juice, because the fiber in the apple slows down all that intense sugar. But remember the wise adage, an apple a day, and there is a lot of value to that old adage, keeps the doctor away. And then licorice root tea. And next time I'll share with you a video about how to use licorice root tea. If you're going to be incorporating nutrients, and as I say, I'm giving you some hints right now about where to look, but I'll go into this more in depth next week. Always work with a health provider. If you're not trained fully yet in nutrition or in holistic health for the body, collaborate and work just to make sure that there's going to be no adverse effects by combining these nutrients and herbs, and I'll walk you through how to do that as well. Next slide. Well, I think we've reached the end of our talk for today. Thank you so much. I'd love to take some questions right now. And then next week, I'm going to share with you more in depth what we did with Miriam and how it turned out. And I think you'll really enjoy learning about that. And remember, I've got a handout today that allows you to check off the kinds of sugar and the sources of sugar in your diet, and then looking at some potential substitutions. Okay, let's look at some of these questions. I tend to drink a lot of sugary smoothies and iced coffees. Absolutely. So continue to drink your smoothies, but make them fresh. We've got a lot of sometimes so-called they use natural foods on the market that we're buying or iced coffees. I really encourage you to make these fresh so that you're in control of what you're taking in. And I think there's an analogy to how we're enhancing control and our clients having control over their lives, even though it's paradoxical, letting go of control as we're enhancing control. The one thing we can control is how we're fueling our brain. So just make some adjustments to make your own smoothies and use natural sweeteners. If they're currently sweetened with sugar, then move to a little bit of honey and then add a little bit of liquid stevia. Same thing with your iced coffee. I guarantee you, you'll feel the benefits. I love stevia. I love raw honey. And for those of you with allergies, a little bit of raw honey from your locale has been shown to reduce allergic reactions because the bees are pollinating with some of those culprits that cause allergies. And it's considered a way to reduce the reactivity. I love a little bit of molasses. I love yacon syrup, a little bit of maple syrup. B grade maple syrup, dark. If it's black, your black molasses, your black maple, your black agave. And then what we're also doing is we're adjusting our taste buds. We're so assaulted by the intensity of powerful tastes in these fast foods and sugary foods and salty foods. We don't really know what our natural taste buds experience. And again, you can hear in all of this the analogy to what we're doing when we're helping a client tune down the excitement of the stressor that they've become so used to that they often gravitate towards. So we're really literally detoxifying and resensitizing our taste buds. Okay, next question. Yes, you mentioned a cortisol test for your clients. What do you recommend? In the course, I teach you about this test. It is a salivary test. There are a number of labs that will do this test. It might be called the Adrenal Stress Index. And it's a test that allows you to gather information in the morning, upon awakening, midday, afternoon, about 4 p.m., and then midnight. And that test, as a clinician, I can read that test before I even meet my client, and I can tell if they are depressed, if they have insomnia. It tells me so much because so much of this is biologically driven. And so these they may come under different names. Adrenal stress index is one of them, or it's often called a 24-hour diurnal cortisol test. You want to be very careful because, and this is something I teach in the ethics and scope of practice section of the course. Some states allow you as a clinician to order a test. Some states allow you to send your client for a test, or some states you need to work with a prescriber for a test. So that's something that we explore more in depth about what you can do, but no matter what you're able to do, it's important to know about this. Just as we need to know about pharmacology, even though we may not prescribe an SSRI, so do we need to know about all these options, whether we actually refer to it or collaborate with a provider to do it. Okay, let's take about two more questions. How is stevia brown rice syrup better than sugar? Generally, well, stevia is from a plant, and there's actually no sugar in it. It's a natural sweet. Um, and so there's no glucose in it whatsoever. So the thing that you want to consider when you're looking at all of your sugar options is how much glucose or fructose is concentrated in the source. Now, I have only a minute or two left, but let's remember that sugar um, was really extracted from the sugar cane. And for those of you involved in social justice, as I am, I always make the connection between sugar and trauma and relinquishing sugar as an act of social justice because the whole sugar industry for the last 200, 300 years arose on the backs of slaves and indigenous peoples, both from Africa and the Western Hemisphere. So I even go so far as to suggesting that giving up sugar is an act of solidarity in recovery from slavery trauma. That said, um, sugar is extracted from the sugar cane. Nature gave us a natural sweet in the form of sugar cane. But what comes with the sugar cane? It's rich in fiber, it's rich in minerals, B vitamins. And so nature gives us natural sweetness to satisfy our sweet tooth and enjoy our lives with that sugar cane. But when we extract that sugar and concentrate it, and take it out of nature's gift to us, it becomes poisonous, just like the coca leaf was given to us by nature and it's used where it grows in high altitudes to weather those high altitudes. But the extraction and the concentration takes it out of the whole plant and all of the balancing factors that don't make it a poison. And so I go into this much more, but that gives you a little bit of a hint about how to think about your question of what makes some of these sugars better than others. It has to do with whether they remain a whole food with all the vitamins and minerals and cofactors that keep it from causing inflammation in your body and keep it from acting as an inflammatory process. One more question. How do you bring up nutrition with clients? Have they ever gotten offended thinking you're trying to put them on a weight loss diet? Well, that's a great question. Um, I'll often bring it up just like I did with Miriam when she was talking about her chronic pain, her mood lability. I said, you know, Miriam, you've experienced a great deal of trauma in your life and you're doing amazing work on it. And I want to share with you that there's new research that suggests that there are foods that are also going to help you feel better, and there are foods that can actually exacerbate the pain that you're feeling. Would you be interested in exploring that with me? I've got lots of resources for you. So that's exactly what I said. She said, "Absolutely, I'd love to." She said, "But I don't want this isn't weight loss diet." And I've had many people say, I said, "No, I'm not interested in weight loss. I'm interested in you feeling great, whatever weight you are." And I want you to be able to enjoy your bike riding and live without pain. Let me know when you'd like to. If you want to, we could set some time aside in our next appointment. She said, "Oh, yes, I'd love to." I said, "Would you be willing to fill out this diary? And no shame, whatever you're doing is okay with me. I want to really support you in choosing what works for you because I've got some hints for you about what's gonna get you off this sugar train that you're telling me about." So that's kind of the way I would approach it, and I give you lots of ways to do that clinically. And of course, we bring a different approach with each different client, and that's the art of our work, is it not? Well, I think I've been given the hook. I'm coming off stage right now. I think that is our afternoon together. I will be back next week and share with you more details about Miriam, her life, and please come back with any questions. Fill out this sugar list checklist for yourself. Come back with some questions, and we will spend more time addressing them next week. And in the meantime, please look into some of the trailer and some of what we're now offering with this new certification for treatment of PTSD and complex trauma. Thank you, everybody.